Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Stories That Brought You Here. It's the podcast dedicated to the stories of the people from Pender Island, British Columbia. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Wakaluk, and I'll be sitting down in one-on-one hour-long conversations with current Pender Island residents to hear the stories that brought them to this active little island we live on, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. Today, I will be speaking with Ethan Smith. Now, if you know Ethan, like I know Ethan, you'll know him as that jokey, good-natured guy working at the ferry terminal you see when you go to leave the island. Today, we're going to get to find out a lot more about Ethan. We're going to get to hear stories from Ethan about working at the Empress Hotel in Victoria. We're going to get to hear about the time he spent living and working in Banff. We're going to get to hear him speak about his love of competitive cycling. We're also going to get to hear him speak about a book that he co-authored a number of years ago, which I found super fascinating to hear about. Now, before we start the podcast, if you happen to be an avid listener of this show, first of all, thank you. And second of all, you may have noticed that there's been a long gap in between episodes, and that's because I just wanted to take a little bit of a break from putting out all these shows back to back, but I think that break is over with now, and I'm back on track. So hopefully, if everything winds up working out the way I plan, you can expect to see episodes coming out once every 10 days or so. So look out for that. All right, that's it for the intro. Now, here is my interview with Ethan Smith. Ethan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
Right on. How you feeling right now?
I feel fantastic, man. How do you feel?
I feel good. Actually, I was not feeling super great earlier today, but whatever that is passed, and I'm feeling better now on this smoky summer evening. Okay, so let's jump right into the first traditional question we always do on this podcast. And if you're ready for it, what brought you to Pender Island?
Well, Chris, I think it was the Queen of Cumberland. I remember standing at the bow of the ship and watching us approach Pender Island, and I thought to myself, this can't be right. There's nothing here. As I was going for a job interview at Poets Cove Resort. Poets Cove was brand new at the time, just being rebuilt from the old Bedwell Harbor Resort, and we were sort of interested in trying out life on a Gulf island. So I had sent off my resume. The resort was very interested in the fact that I had experience with the Empress Hotel in Victoria. So I went over for an interview and made my way all the way down to Poets Cove and met the folks down there. And the first thing they asked me was, so you worked at the Empress Hotel? And I was like, yeah. And I did some other things too. I was actually only there for a year. And they were like, no, really, we're only interested in hearing about the Empress. So I was like, well, okay, but I would, again, it was only a year and I've got some other things on my resume. And they were more or less like, can you start Tuesday? And that was basically what brought us here.
Okay, so a job at Poets Cove. And so you worked at the Empress before that. So you were living in Victoria during that time?
Well, we had been living in Victoria, my wife and I. And I do need to just interject here for a moment that my wife has asked that I don't discuss her during the interview. She gets a little concerned about what I say when I have an audience. So all I do want to say is during this interview, I'll probably say we and us often. And when I say that, within that we and us is this lovely woman who I've shared the past 18 years and counting of my life with. Thank God. And love, I won't say anything more about you. Anyway, we were living in Victoria. We got married. We went on an extended honeymoon. And when we got back, we weren't sure what we were going to do. We weren't working. So we threw out a couple of resumes, one of which was to Poets Cove. And like I said, I got a pretty fast response to that. So I started the job rather suddenly, and Tanya came within the week, and we rented a place on Pender, and we wound up being there for almost 2 years before moving deeper into the community.
All right. And what year was this in?
2003, 15 years ago.
All right. So when you went for the job interview, that was your first ever time being to Pender Island?
It was totally the first time on Pender Island, yeah. And it was just overgrown with trees. I'd only ever met one person who'd ever been to Pender before, and he didn't actually sell it very well. So I was a little trepidatious, but in the long run, it worked out.
Okay, right on. And so when you said you lived in your first place for 2 years, what part of the island was that on?
We were actually renting nearby here on Captain's Crescent.
Okay.
And then while we were there, we found the property and that we now live on, fell in love with it. And decided to buy it and build a house and have a baby and do all that grown-up stuff.
Okay. Well, let's lead right into building a house, because I know that was a huge endeavor that you had in your life. And maybe if you want to talk about that a little bit, because I'm kind of fascinated by people who do that, because it's something I would never personally take on, and I'm blown away that people do it. So what was the driving force in building your house, and how did the experience go?
I'm not sure what the driving force was, except that I seem to only really be very happy when I'm doing really difficult things and pushing myself to my limits. So we took a bunch of books out of the library on building and decided what we wanted to do. I had never built anything before. So I thought, well, how hard can this be, really? We brought a bunch of library books. We talked to a bunch of builders, and a lot of beautiful picture books with lots of natural building techniques in them. So we looked at cob, we looked at straw bale, rammed earth, light clay, which is wood chips and clay. We settled on wood chips and clay because they were ingredients that we had here in abundance on Pender, both of those items. We also had lots of trees around to use as a timber frame structure. So again, we decided, how hard can this be? And we dived in. And it took us about 7 years. And I would say it was sort of like a PhD course in carpentry. Fortunately, there are a lot of wise people around here who were able to hold my hand a lot and help me, and a building inspection team that kept me honest all the way along the line. So yeah, it was a epic job, but now it feels pretty wonderful.
Okay, right on. And so how long has it been since the house has been completed?
About 6 years, although some would say that it's not really completed yet. There's still some, red tuck tape here and there that I haven't put molding on, but just haven't found the time to do that.
Yeah, fair enough. So in terms of building your own house and figuring out a design, what is it about your home that you really enjoy the most? What is the feature about it that you're really excited to experience every day?
Oh man, Chris, I'll tell you right now is the most obvious, because we've had quite a hot month, and the thick clay walls that we have keep it really, really cool. So you can open the windows overnight, let a cool breeze blow through, and then you close the windows, and the house actually stays the same temperature all day long, no matter how hot it is outside. No air conditioning, no outside services or anything happening. It just stays nice and cool all the time during the day, which is really welcome. Feels perfect.
That's great. That's great. And, you talk about doing alternative building. Would you imagine yourself doing that if you're not living on Pender, like in your life experience leading up to this? Or was the alternative building something that came about because of your time on the island?
I'd say it was pretty impulsive, actually. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I really didn't have experience at it at all. I took a timber framing course to help me learn. And I asked a lot of questions of a lot of people, and I can't count the number of builders on this island who spent time with me and taught me things.
All right. Okay, well, we're just going to back it up a little bit here and move back into, I guess let's talk about maybe your earlier years and, something that you sent in an email when I asked you to send some information about your life and things you want to talk about. Competitive running came up.
Yeah, I had sort of an eccentric childhood, I guess, in that I grew up out in a remote valley. There was no electricity. There were very few other kids around. We worked hard on our farm. It was fairly self-sufficient. And it was sort of a pioneering lifestyle, and often difficult and challenging. But for a young kid growing up, I sort of needed an outlet. And a lot of that I found just by being out in the woods by myself. And then it started by going for long walks, and then eventually running. And I really got into that. And we also did some cross-country skiing, my sister and I, and started racing, cross-country ski racing, and did quite a bit of that. As time went by, I got more and more into the running. So I was kind of doing it all the time and training and going to a lot of events, especially once I had a driver's license and could actually go to them. And I found a lot of peace in there. It became sort of, I guess it became my form of meditation, where all of the worries I had, all the sort of angst about childhood and where my life would take me and stuff, all of that just fell away when I was pushing myself hard. When I was actually out there running for hours, it would fall away. The thoughts would fall away, and I'd find myself sort of running easily in the space around the thoughts. And I could see my thoughts around the periphery, but I didn't have to pay any attention to them. And that's actually persisted through my life with running. After a couple injuries, it turned into mountain biking and then road biking. And that continues to today, as a lot of people know because they hear me talk about it all the time, that I'm always cycling. And a lot of Penderites have kindly avoided running over me on the road. They see me all the time, but they very courteously go around me because they know I'm just out there doing my thing. And boy, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's nice not to get run over when you're on your bike.
It sure is.
All right. Good job, Pender drivers. Well, whereabouts was this? Was this in BC that you grew up, or?
Yeah, it was in the West Kootenays. So we used to do a lot of cross country skiing out in this valley, and the running is where I do my training. And then we'd travel around to different races and such too. And it became that there was a few of us who would go on these usually 10-kilometer races. And I went on a bunch of them. And then after I left home, I was in college in Ottawa, and I was in a racing series there. So I would do a 10-kilometer race every week. And this was when I was about 19 or something. So for a while there, I got fairly fast and pretty good at it because I was doing quite seriously. And I ran the Ottawa Marathon twice. So, and I kept doing that. And then I started cycling more, doing the biking legs of triathlons. And then when I eventually started playing in the Rockies, I moved out to the Rocky Mountains, and I mountain biked there all the time. I mountain biked there for about 13 years.
Okay.
A lot, and skiing as well. And then, like I say, I eventually moved into road biking.
You know, it's interesting because you say the West Kootenays and you spent a lot of time running in the woods by yourself.
I did. Well, we had lots and lots of logging roads and old dirt roads and stuff, and we'd go for these long runs.
So did you run into much wildlife while you were doing that, or?
Oh, yeah. Out there, wildlife was just a norm. We had an apple orchard, and there were bears around and stuff, but I don't think I knew it was dangerous at the time. Nobody told me.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because, like it's so safe on Pender here. There's no predators or anything. And the idea of spending hours and hours and hours of your childhood running through the woods is actually kind of amazing, right? And like, especially in that condition. Yeah, that's really neat because I would be a little afraid of cougars and bears out there, I think, personally. Yeah,
that was more of an issue when I lived in the Rockies because then there really were cougars and really big bears. So there was a little bit of a different risk there. But not so much in my childhood. I never really felt at big danger from the wildlife there.
Okay. And so when you were in Ottawa, you said you did 10-kilometer races every week.
Yeah, I did that for 2 or 3 years, I guess, where, it was weekly. So it was good. It was a fun run.
Cool. Right on. Yeah. And 2 marathons.
And 2 marathons, yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Although it has to be said, the first marathon I did, I ran when my shoes were far too new. And with 5 kilometers left in the marathon, the ambulance had to pull me off of the course because I was bleeding through my shoes.
What?
So then I was determined to go out next year and do well, which I did. That becomes part of the whole endurance thing, too. You got to learn to let your shoes break in before you do a big ride.
Yeah.
Big run.
I broke them in with blood.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to Ottawa and you go to college, and then in college you went for broadcasting?
I sure did, yeah. I was. We had a really good radio broadcasting program there, and I was the morning man on the radio station. And we had 3 different campuses, so it was really super fun. I was really attracted to the show WKRP in Cincinnati, which is one of the reasons I chose broadcasting, because I wanted to be Dr. Johnny Fever.
Who didn't?
And I didn't know at the time that wasn't really what it was like. Nobody told me that either. So when I got into the media in the real world, when they were like scripting my jokes for me and things, it was a little bit different for me, a little bit disappointing. But anyway, we'll talk about that after. But yeah, so I went to broadcasting college, and that was really a hoot. It was a lot of fun. So I spent all of my days in school meeting lots of people, lots of connections. I interned at a radio station in Ottawa, which was great, had a big audience and was really a lot of fun. Yeah, and then at the same time, I was running all the time, running and cycling all the time. So it was good times. Okay,
so you say they scripted your jokes for you?
When I got out in the real world, I don't want to criticize anyone in particular, but there was a lot of disappointments in the media industry. I didn't like how the media would pick on people and try to exploit bad news and make a really big story out of it, and always be hunting sensational stuff. So, that's one reason I decided not to stay with the industry. And, part of it might have just been my natural talent too. I'm comfortable behind a mic, but I don't have a great radio voice. So at the best of times, my voice is kind of high and nasal and recognizable, and sounds like I'm hopped up on coffee, which often I'm not. So it's like, I didn't stay with it. It didn't feel like the fit. After a while, it was time for a change. So I left it.
Okay. Well, how long did you do that for, Al?
Well, I guess I was the morning man in the radio station there for a couple of years, and then part of a year for the station in Ottawa, and then I guess another year out in the West Kootenays. I had a big choice to make. I had job opportunities in the West Kootenays where I grew up, or in Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia. Both places told me that they would give me a trial. And I couldn't go and test both of them out. I didn't really have any money. I scraped together enough money for a Greyhound ticket. At the time, it was only $99 across the country for Greyhound. And I chose to come back home to the West Kootenays. And, it was either the right decision or it wasn't. Things may have gone completely different. If I'd gone to Port Hawkesbury, I might still be in the industry. Who knows? But, I'm pretty happy about the way my life has turned out. So no regrets.
Nice. What community in the West Kootenays was it?
Well, it was a network station that goes right through the West Kootenays. I was actually behind a mic in Trail, BC.
Oh, okay. Trail.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So from Trail, BC, shortly after that, I guess you made your way up to Banff. Is that correct?
First to Calgary. And then I did a whole bunch of different jobs and flipped around for a little while. And I really caught an acting bug. And I got into acting, first of all, just for theater. And then I started to make a little money at it. So I decided just to stay with that. And I started doing lots of acting and got myself an agent and stuff. And I got a gig as a regular extra on a TV show called Lonesome Dove. And I did a full year of that. So I never had a speaking part in there, but I just got to walk around in the background in the show and be background. That was the name of my character, is Background. Yeah. There was a few of us with the same name. It was funny. So, so I did that for a while. And the weirdest job I had through acting in Calgary was actually as a medical test patient for the emergency room at the Foothills Hospital. So the doctors who are in an emergency room, a big city emergency room, have to stay on their toes all the time. So a team of instructors would teach me how to respond to different injuries or illnesses. And they would bring me in on a stretcher or what have you into the emergency room. And the doctors would respond to me, and people who were inspecting them would tell them if they were making mistakes or what have you. So I had to act out all these maladies. It was very strange. Sometimes I would feel ill after it just because I was being poked and prodded all the times. But sometimes it was really fun. It was be like I'd have a big bone sticking out of my neck or my leg or something and have all this fake blood on me.
No way. Okay, so they would put fake blood on you.
Oh, yeah, big time. Huge makeup. So I'd walk out of there like dripping with blood and looking horrible, or like with an arm hanging off of me. And I'd walk into the coffee shop across the street from the hospital. They caught on to this for a while, but for a while they didn't. They just thought I was some horrible wounded person walking in. And I'd see like the poor, barista there trying to be nice to me while gagging. And I'd be like, so what are you doing later? Which never worked, funny enough. But so that was kind of fun. But it was spotty income, and I tried really hard to support myself at acting, and I did a lot of it. But like a lot of actors, I hit rock bottom a couple times too. I'm not afraid to admit I used a food bank a couple times because I had to. And it was for a while there. It was pretty tough. During this whole time, I spent almost all my free time in Banff, camping, hiking, biking all the time, and skiing. And it was every spare moment I had. So I actually went and saw a career counselor. And she was awesome. I highly recommend this to anybody, to find a good career counselor and go talk to them, because she was fantastic. And she asked me just the right questions. I told her that, I'm not really succeeding at acting, and I don't know that I want to keep, doing this lifestyle. And she's like, what do you like doing the most? And I said, I like playing in the Rockies. And she's like, well, why don't you go live there? And I'm like, oh, you can't get jobs there. And she's like, have you tried? And I was like, no. And she's like, just go. And I'm like, well, I can't just go. And she's like, just go. So I did. I just went up to the Rockies, and I had a job within a couple of days and a home, and it worked out really well. I worked my way right up into a supervisorial role for a tourism company, and it actually worked out great.
Okay, so what age was that at?
My late 20s.
Late 20s?
Yeah.
Okay, so some time doing broadcasting in Ottawa, and then eventually the West Kootenays.
And then acting and flipping around for several years, yeah.
Okay, wow, that's really interesting, right? That sounds like a pretty fun, decade of your 20s.
Yeah, it was chaotic. There was a lot of self-destructive behavior, but it was a lot of fun adventure, too.
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit of self-destructive behavior is what should happen to us in our 20s. It's time for experimenting, and
it gives us something to chuckle about when we're 50.
For sure, definitely. It's funny, I guess, through this and other avenues, talking to people in their 60s and them describing experiences that they had in the 60s for some of them. And it's kind of amazing to hear people reflecting back on what their youths and childhoods were like. And it's no big deal anymore, you know what I mean? And it's just have a bit of a laugh about it. But at the time, it was probably really intense, obviously. Experience,
oh man,
right?
Yeah. Everything's huge back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now a lot of it seems kind of laughable. And some of the details become fuzzy for me too. So I have to put certain details in to make the story work. But I also feel like, you can't ever let truth get in the way of a good story. So I let my mind wander, and it's like, yeah, I think this is the details as best as I possibly can, and then tell the story.
Yeah, for sure. I've gotten so hung up on telling stories to, like, they have to be so truthful. They have to be like as truthful as possible. And I'm starting to let that slip. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've made a decision. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll just fill in a couple of details here and there. Who's going to remember? I don't know if I remember.
Wait till you hit 50, Chris. And then at that point, you can just give yourself completely, it's just like, you know what? I've done my time. I'm halfway there. I can say whatever I want.
The brain cells aren't there anymore. I can think about it as much as I want.
That's right. Yeah.
So, okay. So you're in Banff, you're in the Rockies, you've got some work. And how long did it take for you to really feel like, okay, this is my dream right now. I'm living in my dream. Or was it you were living in your dream right now? Like, how were you feeling during those first few years in Banff?
I felt really good. It was a heck of a lot of fun. I was earning money for like the first time in a decade, and I was skiing and I was mountain biking. The nature of Banff for any resort town is that they're very transient. So there's a lot of people coming and going all the time. So you make new friends in the summer and they leave in the fall. And that happened year after year after year. And it was difficult for me. And I was also, after, 13 years, I guess, of playing in the Rockies, I felt like, I was no longer with a bunch of my peers. I was out late drinking at night with a bunch of 20-year-olds when I was 35. So that started feeling a little funny to me.
Sure.
Yeah. I can remember once this one girl saying to me that she had introduced me to her sister, and she was like, "Oh, my sister says you're pretty cute for an old guy." And I remember thinking at the time, I'm 30. How did that get old?
That's funny. I know.
So that was funny, but I had spent a lot of time in Victoria and on the West Coast and really loved it out here. And I'd made a conscious decision to move to the coast. So I sort of drew a line in the sand where it's like, okay, when I get to this stage, I'm going to do it. I'm going to move. And I met my future wife at the time, and I decided to stick with it and move, and really hope that she wanted to come along, and thank goodness she did.
What was it about the West Coast that really made you want to move here?
I really love the connection to the water. I like the milder climates too. I would leave the cold snaps in Banff. Once I was able to afford an airplane ticket, I would fly out for my holidays when it would be minus 30 out there and land at the Victoria airport, and I could breathe and everything was green, and I could go for a kayak ride or go for a bike ride. There's all these great biking trails around Victoria, and it blew my mind that I was actually doing that in December.
Cool.
Yeah. So I just I love that. I love that climate, and I love the fact that you could be outdoors doing things for, year round, and just, So really, really liked it.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I'm just going to bring it back to the Empress for a sec. You worked at the Empress, and how was that? I've never known anybody else who's worked at the Empress before.
It was great, and that's what got me from Banff out there. And I had met people out there, and I was pretty sure that my industry connections could get me out there. So I went to them and said that I would love a job. And I wound up with a job there as an evening duty manager. So the place is fantastic. It's absolutely steeped in history, and more so than any other tourism property I've ever seen. It belongs to the community. They take ownership in it. They like hanging out there. They like walking through their hotel. You better not tell anyone they don't belong there, because they do. It's not a hoity-toity hotel where you can escort people out of there if they seem like they don't belong there. They just do. Everybody's welcome there. People who are spending $400 a night, or people who have just wandered in off the street and normally live in a box.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So it's pretty wild. But it also means a lot of things happen there. There's a lot of conferences. So when you're the evening duty manager, you're dealing with a lot of people who are attending a conference, a lot of people who have been imbibing in alcohol, a lot of people off the streets who have been drinking alcohol. In fact, alcohol was a real common theme at that job, unfortunately. So it was sort of straining on me a bit doing that in the evenings. And I didn't know whether I'd stay in the industry or not, but I knew I needed a break. So we got married, and then we went on a long road trip sort of around North America for about 6 months, and just traveled and camped and visited people. And that was really nice. And we got back to Victoria, and I was like, we're going to stay here. We're going to try an island. And again, this is when I put my resume in for Poets Cove, and it got gobbled up.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into the Pender talk here, but I didn't know about this 6-month road trip, actually. So wow, a 6-month road trip across North America.
Yeah, we went, I guess I shouldn't say North America, because we didn't get into Mexico. But the Canada and the States we did. We went down the West Coast and then across to the Gulf of Mexico. As far south as St. George's Island, I think it was called, in Florida, and then back up the East Coast into the Maritimes. My God, was it fun in the Maritimes.
Okay, how come?
Fantastic. Well, we started off in Antigonish at the Highland Games, and it was like I could be wrong here, but like a week-long event or something. And we camped out in a field with thousands of other people. And every night at the end of the Highland Games, there would be this 150 bagpipe salute. And then it would be followed by this wild ceilidh, where you drank beer and danced your feet off until you dropped and crawled back to your tent, literally. Those people were so welcoming and so much fun. It just blew my mind.
Cool.
I don't know how that place can be. I don't know how the Maritimes can be so hard up financially, because I think they should be rocking it for ecotourism and for culture. It's really pretty amazing. So then after that, we came all the way back across Canada, visited family and friends, and traveled all the way back to Victoria.
Wow. Yeah. 6 months, though. That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so you come back from that trip, you eventually moved to Pender, and you talked about Poets Cove. And for people who don't live on Pender Island or are unfamiliar with Poets Cove, it's a resort on the South Island, and it's a very swanky place that opened up. And sorry, you started working there just as it opened?
Yeah, it had been Bedwell Harbor Resort, and there were 5 fellows from Alberta who spent a lot of time in Bedwell Harbor Resort and pulled together the money and bought it for themselves, and then created Poets Cove Resort. So I don't know, they probably were the owners for 8 or 10 years, I want to say, and then they sold it to the current owners. So it's a totally different management team, different owners and management entirely than it was when I joined there. Yeah.
Okay, and so you worked there for a brief period of time, and something interesting I wanted to talk about yourself and is different kinds of jobs you've had on the island. And one in particular that I really want to hear about is you working for the parks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went from Poets Cove to actually drove the Pender freight truck for a little bit, and then Talisman Books, and then the Parks Commission doing the trail building and maintenance around the island, and then eventually BC Ferries. But so as far as the trail building was concerned, I guess I did that for 3 years. And Pender is just unbelievable as far as park trails are concerned. With beach accesses and little parks, there are a total of 81 designated parks and trails around the island. Actually, I think it's up to 82 now because, Ben's opened another trail up. So there's at least one more that I know of. But it's incredible. It's every seems like every 100 meters or something, there's another marker post. So I was fortunate enough to be able to rebuild some old ones and build a lot of new ones. And I was by no means a pioneer in that. There is some people on this island who are still here who did that for years before me. And some of those trails are really old. A lot of work's been put into them. Huge amount of effort in the park system here. It's very impressive.
Okay. And we spoke about this a few weeks ago. And I think that you said that you built 12 new trails while you were doing the job?
I believe it was 12, yeah. So some of them would be very short. It would just be a little outlet with a bench and a marker post and a path with an overlook. And then some were much more involved, like the one at Abbott Park that I mentioned. You mentioned it in the end of one of your other interviews, and I put a lot of time in on that one, and I really love it. It's probably my favorite, just because it required a lot of effort with the staircases and benches and table and what have you. Yeah,
it's super steep. That was at the end of Brent Marsden's episode, and I hadn't been up there in maybe about 2 years or so, and it is a high point and it overlooks Buck Lake and the ocean. It kind of threw me for a loop, actually, when you told me that you did that trail, because I didn't even really think about how much work was involved in actually building the trail. I was more thinking about how much work it was involved just climbing it myself that day, let alone the work involved in it. But so that is your favorite trail that you did?
I sort of use it as a gym now. On my days in between my bike rides, I cross-train, and by going up to Abbott Park, I like going up there really early in the morning when there's nobody else around. And there's just arbutus trees and, eagles and birds around and stuff. And I work out up on the top of there, and I have yet to see anybody else there. It's like still one of the best kept secrets. Maybe it won't be now.
I don't know. It's pretty steep. People might try it out and quit halfway. I don't know, but it's an incredibly steep little spot. But that's cool. And so, what are some of the other trails that you did?
Well, there's a number of them. probably eat up too much time in the interview to go on about too many of them, but there's some nice ones. Ogden Point, way up at the top of the north end of the island. There's a really nice overview trail over there. A couple sweet little ones down on South Pender, and there's like one called Saturna View, which is a nice, just a little loop trail, and a lot of little extensions like at the Enchanted Forest. I did one that goes from the Enchanted Forest out to the waterfall, and there's also another trail that goes up on a bluff there with a little bench and stuff. So, and Greg Lucas helped me with a bunch of them as well. He and I rebuilt the Ansia Road Ocean Access, which is a huge staircase. And Greg works incredibly hard and is a lot of fun to work with. So he was a blast to have along.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice to have Greg Lucas is a pretty awesome person. Yeah. Good jokey individual. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, that's great. And, I think it's interesting because when I'm on these trails, and I have gone on them a lot, I rarely think about who or the work involved in doing them, more just sort of blissed out enjoying the experience. But I'll say thank you. Thank you for building some of those trails that we get to enjoy.
Thank you. Actually, I think of it as a privilege. Like I wouldn't want to... I wouldn't want to toot my own horn too much about it because I feel like I was one of a whole lot of different builders who have worked on the trail systems now. And it really feels like an honor. And one day I was working on the George Hill Trail, and I built a support rail around, and I poured some cement, and I lugged all the cement up the hill and poured it all. And then, but a local woman, she walked down, she said hi to me, and I walked down the trail and she was going back up, and I didn't think much of it. And the next time I went up, she had done this beautiful little shell work where she made like a little mosaic in this fresh cement I just put in there.
Right on.
And then I saw her at the ferry, and I thanked her for doing that. So in a way, it's like, I think the trail building is almost like a community effort.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a sweet little story.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. So you jumped out of that career, and then where did you land after that?
Well, it was really, I was at Talisman Books for a bit. I met Barry Mathias when I first moved to the island, and really fell in love with him and his wife, Claire. They're really beautiful people, and chatted with him in the bookstore several times. And he, of course, is very tied up with Solstice Theater and very busy. And he found out that I had done a lot of acting. So he said to me, I'm directing a play in the spring called Under Milkwood, a Dylan Thomas play, and I've got 3 roles for you that I'd like you to do in it. And also, if you're ever interested in working in the bookstore, if you feel like this isn't really your thing at the resort, just saying, you can join me. I was interested, so I left the resort and came to work for them.
Okay.
So I did that for a while. It wasn't full time, but it was enough time, and I was starting to build the house, and my wife had our daughter. So it sort of worked with being able to spend some time with her too. But I needed more income on top of that. And I got the Parks Commission job, which was great. And that was really able to help subsist me for a little while. Then eventually got the BC Ferries job. And that was 10 years ago. And that was very much on call for a long time. So I still had to piece together income for a very long time. But it took a while until it could finally be full time in my one gig. So I feel very blessed because I know that a lot of people on this island work very hard to make it work for their families and themselves here. And in fact, for a lot of them, they aren't able to. I'm sad that in this little community that prides itself on embracing everybody, that there are so many people who have come here and not been able to feel that or not been able to make it work out, and they've left. And I feel like I've had to say goodbye to a lot of good people who have come and not been able to make it work. And I feel really grateful to have one of the few steady jobs on the island.
Nice. That's really well put, because I think that's a pretty common story that all of us probably shared, that we see a lot of people come and go. I know when my wife and I moved to the island in 2006, we were here for about 5 months through the winter and couldn't make it work. So we had to leave, and we came back about 4 years later when we were a little more financially established. And, sometimes it works out for the best like that. But I've seen some people who haven't wanted to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. But anyway, so gratitude about having the job at BC Ferries. And I think a lot of people probably will recognize you, obviously, because we all come and go from this island as being a pretty recognizable figure down at BC Ferries there. And we won't really touch on that too much. But just to get back into something you talked about, the Solstice Theater and getting back into acting, how was that first play? How did that go?
Oh, it was a blast. It actually involved about 50 cast members. Like, it was like half the island. It's incredible we were able to get an audience at all, actually. There were so many people in it, involving a whole bunch of kids and a whole bunch of grown-ups. And it was really neat because it was right near the beginning of our tenure on Pender. And we met so many people that I now still have that connection with. And we've done a lot of plays since then, which is really fun. And Solstice Theater is great to be involved with. Some of them have just been just a riot. But that one stands out because it was the first here and because we made all of those initial contacts. And sometimes it's funny now, it's like there's people I don't get to talk to very often, but I'll still see them and we just sort of, share a little laugh for a moment because that situation, which is the case, as you know, with a lot of plays. It's a lot of fun putting on a show for the community.
Yeah, totally. I've done a few plays and it's great. But how much does being involved with the Solstice Theater mean to you? Because I know that when roles come up, and I think this has happened at least once, that they're struggling to find a male actor in there that you've jumped in and taken the part to help out,
Well, my favorite is just doing the short little bit parts. When we did the play Office Hours, and I did a short scene in there with Joyce Davis, and it wasn't such a big role that it was like all time consuming for rehearsing and what have you, but it was just a ton of fun because it was just full on comedy, and just had a blast with it. And I like short, small roles like that. It's great to do a full length play where you have lots of lines and stuff too, but recently Crimes of the Heart this past year as well. That was a lot of fun just because I got to be a supporting actor to a team of really strong women. And that was just a blast. It was really fun working with them and not being one of the leads, but just coming in as a color character on the side was really a lot of fun.
Right on.
Yeah. So I'll keep on doing that from time to time, working full time and also, having equal time for family and cycling, of course. I can't say yes to all of the acting roles or even, audition for them, but I'll just keep doing them once in a while for sure.
Okay, so you mentioned cycling, and I was definitely going to go there. So let's go there now because you have a race this weekend?
Well, I do, yeah. Yeah, I won't get into the details of that too much, but the Tour de Victoria, I've been part of the event. It's a fantastic event that's put on by Ryder Hegedal, who is probably Canada's best-known cyclist and Olympian and Tour de France, what have you. He's just recently retired, so he puts a lot of effort into this big event in his hometown of Victoria every year, and it's the 6th time in a row that I've done it, and I get really excited about the event. I love traveling to events, and I've gone to quite a few off island as well. But this one's just really fun, and it's great being local and knowing a whole lot of the riders and being part of it all is really a blast.
Okay, well, I want to delve into this a little bit because you are a competitive cyclist. Yeah. And let's hear about Ethan Smith, the competitive cyclist.
Well, that ties right back to the childhood thing of finding my peace in endurance sports. And when I'm being competitive, it's very much a friendly competition, but working with a peloton when you're cycling. So a peloton is when you have anywhere from, say, 10 to 100 people in a really tight cluster where your tires are literally only inches apart and you're traveling along between about 35 and 40 kilometers an hour. And you do this for a long time and you take turns pulling the other people along. So you're riding right behind one and then someone rides in front. So you take turns on the lead and it's really a team effort and it's really neat. Everybody has kind of the same mindset. You're all trying to do as well as you can. And make no mistake, we are racing each other, but we're very supportive of each other. It's not like a group of pro cyclists where you might see, nasty things to try to win or whatever. That's just very much working together as a team, but doing your best. And I get a heck of a rush out of it. It's when you have, sometimes it's thousands of people starting in one mass start and you hear everyone clicking in at the same time and switching into the gears. And then just the sound of the tires on the pavement. And there's usually loud rock music playing and stuff. It's a high that just lasts with me forever. It's so much fun.
Right on. Well, okay, so when you say that you're all helping each other out, but you are racing at the same time, so how does that work in terms of the coordination of somebody understanding that it's their time to go in the front or somebody not taking that responsibility? Like, what are the social dynamics within that?
If it's really good, if you've ever stood on a big sand flat and watched coastal seabirds flying together, those little tiny, like the pipers and stuff, the sandpipers, where you'll have like 50 or 100 birds really tight. And you wonder how they can all move together as once and they'll land and they'll go up and they'll zigzag around in the air, but always as a cohesive unit, all these little birds. It's something like that. Like it really feels like that to me. There often is no discussion at all. You just move through. There's a crack. You move through it. Then you're at the front. Then you drop back one and someone else takes the place. What happens competitive wise is farther out, people get tired. So the stronger riders keep working their way up to the front. And then you only have a few left. So then you're kind of riding on your own or with a smaller pack as it goes along. But it's just fun. It's sort of along the lines of team sports, except that it's all about the endurance. It's about you're working together, but you're also pushing each other and yourself for a long, long time. And I just fall into sort of a meditative state with it, where it's just everything else just falls away. It's really neat.
Nice. So even being in a tight cluster pack like that, you would even describe that in that moment of competition and being inches away from other people's tires.
Chris, you can't think of anything else when that's happening. So it's like there can't be any worries or anxieties. You're not going to think about unpaid bills or loans or anything like this or work. It's not going to come up because you have to stay so focused on the moment of where your tire is and the tires are around you. And you're going at that speed and there's metal all around you. You really have to stay just right there in the now.
Yeah, that's great. I have such a hard time personally letting my awareness of time slip away. And when I am able to succeed in doing that, I feel as if that's one of the biggest successes in my life, right? And so what you're saying is that being in that moment of cycling and being in the present in terms of like our normal awareness of time, that's gone.
Yeah, it really is. And I have to, I'm doing it for myself, and I don't want to look like like I'm just being some sort of a hot dog when I'm out on training runs or something. But it's, if I'm out there training really hard and I blow by a mountain biker or someone, just a recreational rider, it's like what they're doing is just as good and just as important. And they're out there, they're being healthy, they're being active, and they're probably having a really good time. And that's their thing. My thing is to push myself as hard as I can. So if I go blasting by you on a trail, I'm still going to be friendly and say hi when I go by. It's not because I'm trying to win or beat you. It's because I'm trying to push myself as hard as possible, because that's how I'm the happiest, is when I'm pushing myself.
That's great. Tell me about your bike. What kind of bike do you have?
I've got a Specialized Roubaix. It's a carbon fiber bike. It's pretty nice. As far as racing bikes are concerned, it's sort of middle of the road, but it's nice. It works well for me.
Okay, right on. Does it have a name?
No. It's just part of me.
It's just part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you click into your bike, you feel totally like it's part of you.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It does. It feels like an extension of me for sure.
Right on. And so this race coming up in Victoria, you said that this is going to be the 6th time you're participating in this one.
Yeah, I've done different lengths. I've done the 145 version of it, the long distance, 3 times. And then the last couple of years, I've done a shorter distance. This year, I'm doing 60 kilometers, which is not really very long. It's more just of a hard, fast ride.
Okay, cool.
2 hours.
Nice. And then just last question about this, because I'm curious about your, we talked briefly about this, and I just want to find out a little bit more about your training regiment, because in terms of somebody who's a competitive cyclist, you said that there's an off season where you just don't cycle at all. Maybe just sort of describe what you do for your training leading into the season, during the season, and then as the season's closing out.
Okay, sure. Through the winter, I when it's darker, my favorite things to do is just get up really early in the early hours when it's still dark with a flashlight, and I go for long walks. Don't usually use the flashlight, unless I hear something rustle in the woods next to me, and turn on the flashlight. Of course, there's no predators here, so it's always a deer. It's never anything but a deer.
Yeah.
But I go for up around Road Lake or whatever. I'll sometimes just walk for hours. I love the early hours, and the rest of my family tend to sleep in more. So I'm usually home having a coffee before they get up, and it all feels really good. So I just do that a lot through the winter. And if it's a nice morning, I'll ride out to work and stuff as well. And I go for a lot of different recreational rides in the winter to keep the base going. And then in the spring, I just start building up and doing a lot of different stuff, which is probably just really boring for the listeners to listen to. But I make myself a training schedule, and I try to set myself some goals, 4 or 5 big events for the year. And I work towards each of those and try to do that as much as possible with a low impact on the family. They like to be involved to some extent, but they also don't want that to be all that we plan our life around, obviously. Yeah, it's my happy place for sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing, because I'm impressed. I think it's pretty darn cool. And the amount of effort that you put into it, we talked a little bit about this beforehand, and it's pretty cool, man.
Thanks.
I think it's great.
It doesn't really benefit anybody but me, unless it inspires some people to go out and push themselves and try their own things. But I wouldn't expect everybody to try to be as much into competition as me. Cycling itself is a really great activity. It's very low impact on the joints. And I think it's something that probably most people could do to feel really healthy and alive.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a recreational cyclist and I love cycling, and it would never really cross my mind to do it competitively. But yeah, I've had some amazing times on my bike. And it's so funny how I think back to, oh yeah, I've been riding a bike since I was in the single digits age wise. And there is this fun playfulness that exists even at the age of 41, jumping on a bike these days and feel like a bit of a kid. And yeah, I love being on a bike. It's great.
Yeah, there are a lot of cyclists who are out there competing in these events up until their 80s. And it's pretty impressive, but it's something you can just keep on doing.
Nice. Inspiring. Yeah. All right. Well, let's lead into the second traditional question for this program, if you're ready for it, which of course is, who has given you help on Pender Island?
Okay. Well, I did think about that question, and 3 people come to mind, so I'll touch on each of them. The first one, most importantly, unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was my neighbor, Barry Erno, who passed away last year. And he was just a wonderful character and taken from us far too young at only 59. And he was just very much kind, very solid man who lived right next door and was building at the same time as me, but he had all the skills. And if you've ever seen the movie or the TV show, the Toolman, Tim the Toolman Taylor, with Tim Allen, Home Improvement, he was totally my Wilson over the fence. Like literally, he had a hat like that, and he would talk to me all the time over the fence, and we would talk all the time. And he was he helped me with so many things with building the house. It's unbelievable. Just personal things too, and gardening, and he was always patient. I never saw him upset or fussed about anything. And he really remarkable guy. So yeah, Barry Erno would be a huge thanks to him, even though he's not here anymore. Boy, he meant a lot to me.
Cool.
The second person would be another Barry, and that's Barry Mathias, who I mentioned before. Far beyond just giving me a job at Talisman and acting roles, he and his wife Claire were like adoptive grandparents to my daughter and to our family. In fact, they've just been a loving, strong source. And Barry is he's very different than the other Barry. Instead of being very kind of quiet and stoic, he's feisty, he's fun, he is unafraid of confrontation, he fights the good fight, he is always up for a good cause, and I love being around him. He's actually taught me a lot. I love his energy.
He's got a great laugh too.
He does. Doesn't he?
He's boisterous, that laugh.
He's fantastic, yeah. The other person, I think, from a parenting perspective that I really want to mention, because she's very important to us as well. Her daughter and my daughter have been best of friends for many, many years. And my daughter is always welcome in their home and spends a huge amount of time there. Second to our home, she's there all the time. And the woman I want to thank is Karen Parker. She is a remarkable character who's done a lot for a lot of kids on the island, and is really, really very strong, neat soul too. And she's always had a place in her heart and her home for my daughter. And that's really important. So big thanks to Karen for that.
What exactly has Karen done that's been so helpful?
Well, Karen is a former educator herself, and she does a lot of programs for kids on the island. She homeschooled her own kids. And she now runs the Epicenter, which was formerly the playgroup on the island. She runs the programs there. And every time that my daughter has spent time in her house, she's not only just there visiting her daughter. Karen she's always leading projects, and she leads games, and she always has activities. And she's very much a hands-on parent all the time. And I think she's quite inspiring to all the kids who hang out around her.
Okay. Cool. Good to know. That's interesting. It's great for me too, because I get to learn about other people, even potential guests, perhaps, right? And get to know a little bit about people's backgrounds through guests answering these questions. So thanks for doing that. But so Barry, and Karen seem as if the common thread I'm sort of picking up on that is that they've really helped your family.
They have. There's so many more. Like your guest Brent Marsden, he was a huge help in building a house. My God, and so many other people. But I just I can't. I'm not going to name everybody.
No, for sure. And just for people listening as well, too, the reason that I asked this question is I think it's really interesting to show the threads that exist within our community. And it's interesting to see the connections that people have, because just the answer that you gave right now, Ethan, with those 3 people, I didn't know that those 3 people, and including Brent Marsden, who you just mentioned as well, too, did have a helpful impact in your life. And I think it's a beautiful thing to hear and to recognize, and also a lot of previous guests have said there's just too many people to mention, which really surprised me early on, because I came to realize, wow, there is a big support network on this island that you might not notice is there if you're not looking for it, or if you're on the fringe of things. But yeah, it's really cool to hear about people who've given you help along the way. But all right, excellent. Something else that I wanted to ask you about as well, too, was a book that you wrote a few years ago, and just want to hear you talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It was the timing of it was a little difficult because it was right at the same time as we're building our house, and I just had a daughter. But I had self-published a book which gained enough interest to give me a publishing offer for a much bigger project. The book that I wrote touched on animals and the environment a lot. The person who would wind up being my co-author for this next book, for the published book, Guy Dauncey, who's a environmentalist and an author living in Victoria, he contacted me and said that his publisher would definitely write a book if I wrote one about animal welfare. I thought about it and I thought, well, sure. I mean, it's always been a dream to be a published author. Why not give it a shot? So the publisher said, well, we could probably do it. Are you going to attach a big name to it? And I thought to myself, and I said, what's the biggest name in animal welfare I can think of? And I said, yes, Jane Goodall. And they're like, do you know her? And I said, no. And they said, are you going to get her for the book? And I said, yes. And I did. So Jane Goodall wrote the foreword to the book, and I wound up with this 3-year journey at the same time as building a house and being a new dad and a relatively new husband for that matter. And this book was huge. It became an enormous project. It was called Building an Ark, 101 Solutions to Animal Suffering. And the upside of it was I went on this amazing journey and had all kinds of doors open to me. The downside of it was I had to be an activist, and I detest being an activist. I'm terrible at it. I'm not particularly good at self-promotion, and I wasn't good at pushing this cause. So I had a publisher and I had a publicist, and I was being interviewed all over the place. I got to go on some national radio shows and did interviews all over, but it was challenging for me. It was very rewarding and also a lot of challenge. And there came a time when I told my publicist, I'm done. And it was successful in that it got a lot of people thinking about maybe living in more reverence with animals. And I wasn't interested in just throwing factory farming in people's faces. I wanted people to live in more reverence to all life around them, which means wildlife and farm animals and everything. It doesn't necessarily mean a vegan lifestyle, although I think ideally that's a fantastic thing for anyone to strive for because it's the lowest possible impact. It's not no impact. There's impact in everything we do. That's inevitable, but it's the lowest possible. But again, I didn't want to be the king of vegans, although I was kind of thrust into that role for a little while. And I went around and did lots of lectures, and people wanted to ask me lots of graphic questions about factory farming and things. And that wasn't really my thing. There's other people who are much better at preaching that gospel than I am. Eventually, I decided that I'd gone as far as I wanted to go with that. And the publisher stopped backing it, but it did do very well for a while. And it won an award. It got a Silver Nautilus Award for books that changed the world. That was back in 2008, I guess. And it did pretty well for a few years. It probably would have done a lot better if I was actually any kind of an activist and went out there and sold the cause some more. But it was very rewarding. It also burnt me out. So I frequently get people asking me now because a lot of people identify with me as a writer, but I haven't really written anything other than just for fun here and there on the side for years now. And I don't really feel like it right now. I guess that part of me is just sort of on a shelf for the time being. But it is funny when people say, have you been writing a lot? I right away think riding, cycling, right? So I right away think that's, yeah, man, tons. And they're like, oh, great. What are you working on? It's like, well, I got this event coming up, and they're like scratching their heads.
That's funny.
But no, I've been writing, not writing. And it seems to make me a lot happier, even though I'm not changing the world by doing it. But, it still feels important to me. I would love people to care more about the world around them, about animals. And I don't just mean that with a broad brushstroke. I mean, really, really caring and being kind to all species of life, people and animals around them, just to appreciate life more. And, the environment is kind of a fragile place. So we do need to take care of it. I'm a longtime Rolling Stones fan, and I sometimes think to myself, after I'm gone, we really have to think about the world we're leaving behind for Keith Richards.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's important.
Keith's going to be going for another couple centuries, I think.
That's right.
At this rate.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Soon to be the president, maybe.
Here's hoping.
Well, it's interesting because I've done a bit of writing. Now, I haven't written a book. That just seems like such a daunting thing to me. But So 3 years you worked on this project for.
I did, yeah. I mean, just with the nature of it, I had to make sure it had scientific facts backing it up, and I had to make sure every source I used was really well tested out. And I had a lot of people like the World Wildlife Federation and all of these different groups, the Jane Goodall Institute, and lots of people working with me. So sometimes it took a while to get information from large groups to get things out there and to get photographs and to have all my facts checked and things edited and what have you. So yeah, it was a pretty big project for sure.
Was there any tangible way that you would say your life changed from writing that book?
I'm sure I grew through the process. It would be hard for me to identify exactly what it was, but I learned some things about myself too. I thought that if I published a book and was out there giving lectures and talking to, a room full of a couple hundred people, that I would really thrive on that. I didn't at all. There was one that comes to mind where I was at a organization in Vancouver that invited me over, and they had several hundred people in this hall, and I had a slideshow and a lecture and a big stack of books on the table. It went very well, and everyone came up and shook my hand and thanked me for coming in. They were very nice, and then they were all leaving, and the host of the show came and said, "They're not buying your books." And I was like, "Oh, it's okay, dude. They listened." And he was like, "Oh," and he grabbed a handful of my books and he went out the door and he forced everyone to buy them on their way out the door.
Wow!
But I can't sell. And he could. So, I mean, I realized at that point, it's like, I'm not really going to succeed at this.
Yeah, because I guess the whole point wasn't necessarily to sell books. It was more to make people aware of the circumstances of a reality, let's say, right? I
like helping people laugh and be inspired, but I don't want to give them negative stuff. One person I give a plug to is David Boyd, who is an incredible author and friend of mine and lives here on the island. I think everybody knows, but he is an eternal optimist. He knows all of the negative points about what we're doing to the environment and animals and what have you, but he always spins it positively. He gives people hope. He makes you walk out of the room, wanting to do something positive. When I listen to him talk, it's just like, man, you got it. That's right on. It's not something that's in my wheelhouse. It's in his.
Yeah. That's why I just saw David yesterday and we had a really brief interaction and both had to go. But I asked him what was happening. He's like, "Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait to tell you about this new thing I'm working on." And it's probably about saving the planet, But you were saying that the book that you did wasn't necessarily about like sensationalizing things. It was more just about giving a broader perspective of.
That's what I was aiming for. There was a lot of pretty hardline activists around North America who really criticized it heavily because I didn't go far enough.
Oh,
but I was trying to do something completely different with it. So I hope I succeeded. I know a lot of people who did tell me that they were touched by it. When I say I actually mean we, because I had myself and Guy Dauncey, my co-author, and some probably close to 20 nonprofit organizations who were helping me with the project.
Wow.
And I had an advisory team of 17 or 20 people. Wow. So really there was a lot of us working on it. But it was a huge curve for me to be the person who was orchestrating it. That was really hard.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're coming up on the end of the time here, and I just wanted to bring it back to talking about running again, something that you mentioned at the very beginning that you did in your childhood, and just wanted to hear perhaps what caused you to stop running and maybe just speak to that for a little bit.
Sure. It was sort of a series of injuries. I was doing a number of different things at a time. I was playing a lot of baseball as well, and I was a catcher when I was playing baseball. So it was pretty hard on the knees. So between that and running, I wound up having a couple of knee injuries and found it pretty hard to do any impact loading after I had 2 surgeries. So after getting that done, it was pretty difficult to keep on running. And I started switching to mountain biking at that time. And then I took a bit of a tumble and actually ruptured a disc in my back. So I had major back surgery in 1994. And I was told at that time that I would never be able to do any impact loading activity ever again. So that was actually, it was close to the time where I started getting into acting and writing and stuff, because I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to be an athlete. So I better have some kind of creative pursuit. But I persevered and I made some adjustments, and I just was pretty much exclusively cycling. I let go of running altogether. And I had to stop being a catcher and I had to stop any kind of distance running, but it really worked. And once I was up in Banff, I found a way to have a balance, and I could meter my body. And I was like, my body's getting stronger. when I was building the house, I stopped all that other stuff because my love of endurance sports went into the house. That became my endurance events. I was there for many hours in a row, just, chiseling out mortise and tenons on the timber frame and many, many hours, pouring rain. That was definitely my endurance event. And I had thought at that time that my years of athletics were probably done of endurance sports. But I got on my bike one day and it felt wonderful. And I realized I'd gotten kind of out of shape. So I signed up for an event the following summer, which was the first Tour de Victoria that I did. And I lost 35 pounds and I trained and I trained and I trained. And the day of the event, it was pouring rain, 70-kilometer-an-hour winds. I rode just a department store mountain bike in it because I didn't have my racing bike yet. And I managed to finish in the middle of the pack, and there were happy tears of joy when I crossed the finish line. It was really wonderful. So no looking back now.
Right on.
I'm going to ride into my 80s.
He's going to ride into his 80s. Excellent. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. Ethan, seriously, man, thank you so much for coming in. I feel like I've learned so much about you, and I really have enjoyed this, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, so to honor that interview, I decided I'd go for a bike ride. So I'm currently biking on the South Island, and I am almost at the extreme end of the South Island at Gallant Point. I'm just making my way down the road here on a bike, and it's a little sketchier trying to carry this recorder and bike with one hand than I thought it was going to be. Anyway, but I had a really good time doing that interview. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Until next time.